Buonasera, benvenuti a New York University, Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò. È un grande piacere accogliere qua con noi il dottor Maronta e in particolare ospitare questa serata dedicata all'incontro dell'identità italiana e dell'identità svizzera, che per tanti aspetti coincidono e per tanti aspetti sono diverse. As you know, this is part of the series of events organized in occasion of the Settimana internazionale della Lingua Italiana. And we are fortunate to have with us as co-sponsors and organizers of this event our friends at the Consulate General of Switzerland in New York, that is represented by Consul Nicoletta Ragazzi, and also from the Italian Consulate General, Dr. Dino Sorrentino. And also it's an event that takes place under the auspices of the Italian Institute of Culture here in New York. And as you might know, Switzerland is the second largest Italian-speaking country in the world. The others not making really big deal of competition being the Vatican and the Republic of San Marino. But it's an important for us and a strategic partner also in the promotion of Italian language in the world. It's one, as you know, of the official languages of the Helvetic Confederation and an important neighbor of Italy. So I think it's the first event that we do that features this partnership and this friendship, and I'm very glad to introduce to you the Deputy Consul of Switzerland in New York, Nicoletta Ragazzi. Thank you. Who is also a very good friend of Casa Italiana. She comes regularly to our events and I'm very happy and proud of that.
Thank you very much. Buonasera. First of all, I would like to excuse Ambassador François Barras, who couldn't attend tonight. He would have loved to be here tonight because he's a very friend of Italian language and he speaks very well Italian as well. I welcome you in behalf of the General Consulate of Switzerland in New York to this evening's lecture, organized in the occasion of the Settimana della Lingua Italiana and Mondo 2012. The Settimana offers a very nice opportunity to Italy and Switzerland to organize an event together, since these two countries share the Italian language as a national language. Actually, Switzerland is a very lucky country because due to our multiple languages, we celebrate not only Italian but French and German too. In other words, tutte le occasioni sono buone per festeggiare. I would like to express at this point our thanks to the Casa Italiana in New York for hosting this conference, and as well as the co-organizer, l'Istituto Italiano di Cultura and the Consulate General. I'm glad to introduce to our Italian speaker tonight, Fabrizio Maronta, who is giving the lecture tonight. I'm very proud to do this. Fabrizio is a resident analyst and member of the scientific board at Limes and others leading Italian magazines in international affairs. He is commenting in a regular basis on geopolitical issues for Italian and foreign TV as well as radio stations. Prior to that, Fabrizio studied political science at the University Roma Tre and worked there as assistant professor until 2009. Fabrizio was kindly ready to replace our initial guest speaker, Dr. Lucio Caracciolo, editor-in-chief of Limes and main author of a special issue of Limes entitled L'importanza di essere svizzeri. The importance of being, which you can see here. Sadly, Dr. Caracciolo had to cancel the trip due to medical reasons. This evening's lecture will focus on Switzerland's identity, seen from an Italian perspective and within the context of the current European identity crisis. It will refer in particular to the content of the Limes issue L'importanza di essere. Thank you very much, Fabrizio, to fly over to New York to speak about this interesting topic. I wish everybody an interesting lecture. Grazie mille.
Grazie.
thank you very much to you for this very kind invitation. Thank you for Casa Italiana for hosting this, and most of all, thank you to all of you for being here. I will briefly, I hope, try to answer those two banal questions. Why an issue on specifically on Switzerland, and why such a weird title, L'importanza di essere Svizzera, the importance of being Switzerland. And I think that answering those two questions involves a little bit of talking about the bilateral Italian-Swiss relation, of course. But I think more broadly, and I hope this will make sense to you, it also involves the trends that are now shaping the European Union, which, as you know, is going through hardships, which are induced by the economic crisis, but are pre-existent, the problems that are pre-existent to that. And that is taking a direction that is not, to put it mildly, what many envisioned for the European Union. And so, to some extent, I will try to sketch how, to convey to you how this bilateral relation between Italy and Switzerland can be, to a certain extent, seen as a metaphor of what is going on in Europe today. It's a bold, it's a ambitious goal. I will try to be as clear and brief as possible. And for the record, for those of you who are not Italian speakers, limes is the Latin word for borders. So we have, I swear, nothing to do with agriculture whatsoever. We are a geopolitical magazine. And we, about a year ago, we came out with this issue that was received by the public with an interest that went, I would have to say, beyond our what we envisioned, what we imagined. And this made us think about the relation between the countries. We started wondering why people in Italy were so interested in a country that is so close to us, both from a geographical and also from a linguistic point of view, at least a part of Switzerland, that we usually give for granted. And here is, I think, the starting point of these remarks tonight. So let's start from the bilateral relations. You may know that we Italians are not renowned in the world for our, let's say, mastery of foreign languages. It's very hard usually to find Italians who speak properly foreign languages. So this is also a caveat for you will excuse if my English falls every now and then. We're not the only one who have this cultural feature, at least not in Europe. I can think of, for example, I lived in Spain for a while, or I traveled very often to France. Those are examples of two countries where usually foreign languages that are language-proof in a way. People tend to not to be keen on speaking foreign languages and learning them. But those two countries, just to stick to that example, they have languages that anyway are somehow spendable abroad. If you speak Spanish, you can go to most of Latin America and also growingly to part of the United States and find it quite easy to interact in your mother tongue. If you're French, you can use your language in parts of Africa or, I mean, in parts of the world that are outside of Europe even, not only France. With Italian is different. I mean, we were commenting before, this conference is part of the Settimana della Lingua Italiana, week of the Italian language, but it's taking place in English. So, as a matter of fact, Italian is a language that that is not easy to be taught and to be used abroad. So, given this circumstance, I would, personally at least, I would think that I would expect Italians to be extremely curious, or I would say even fond of actually the only country in the world apart from Italy where Italian is at least partially spoken as an official language, which is Switzerland. You can see here, I'm sorry these maps which are featured in our volume are in Italian because I didn't have the chance to get them, to have them translated into English in time for this conference. But by the way, you see orange spots, which are the parts of Switzerland where Italian is spoken, is the minority of the Swiss population speaks Italian, but still Italian is an official language of the country. So actually Switzerland is probably the only foreign country in the world, from an Italian perspective, where you can go and use your own language, if you're Italian, without having to feel very lucky for finding someone who speaks your own language. I mean, you don't use it by chance. You can go there and be sure that, at least in a part of the country, your language is spoken. So I would expect Italians to be in tune with such a country that has this particular feature, unique feature from an Italian perspective. But, and this is the reason that pushed us to have this issue on Switzerland, the fact is that it's not really like that. And this is quite strange. In this issue, we published parts of an opinion poll that was carried out, I think, in 2010 on an Italian sample that was representative of the overall Italian population, so both the, let's say, common people and also the member of the establishment, economic, cultural, academic, and so on. And there are 2 points about this poll that I would like to share with you, because I think they're interesting and relevant to our discourse here. The first is that the vast majority of the people polled expressed a very, very positive attitude towards the country, towards Switzerland. I just wrote down some of the most used adjectives that people use to describe Switzerland. According to them, it's a clean, organized, well-maintained country, which is something that we really lack in Italy very often. It's beautiful, it's pleasant, it's precise, it's rich, it's even calm and serene. I mean, you live in heaven. You didn't know that, but we know better than you. You live in heaven. But I think the second point, and that is probably the most interesting one, is that these kind of statements were shared both by the people in Italy that had a direct experience of the country and by those who had no idea of the country because they had never been there. So the first point that I would like to make is that it's useless to discuss whether we Italians like Switzerland or not, because the point is that it's not if we like it or not. The point is that we just don't know it. I mean, people in Italy very often, if they are questioned about Switzerland, if they think and talk about the country, they don't think and talk about a country they know. They think about and talk about an abstract idea they have of the country that doesn't stem from a direct experience, but I would say more from stereotypes, both positive and negatives, they have learned, they have absorbed by other people or by the media or by other sources. Now, is it possible to have some water maybe at some point?
Yes.
I'm fairly sure that this wouldn't be a topic for a conference, so I wouldn't be wasting your time here with this. If we were talking about 2 countries that were at the opposite side of the world, if this conference was about, for example, Italy and Burma, or Italy and Thailand, or Italy and I don't know what, well, probably these things I'm saying would be banal, and I hope they're not anyway. But we're talking about 2 countries that share a border, that share nothing less than a language, which is a very strong cultural feature, and that anyway share much more than that. And I would like to inflict to you very briefly some facts and figures just to frame what I'm saying. Just 3 or 4 points. The Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs estimates, or better counts, some 500,000, if something more than 500,000 Italian citizens currently living in Switzerland, which is a lot of people. If you think that Switzerland, correct me if I'm wrong, has more or less 8 million inhabitants, 7 million of which are actually Swiss citizens. So that means that there is a very strong Italian diaspora, which is not just a thing of the past. which is something that still goes on, and so the Italian presence in Switzerland is constantly renewed, if you want. And so that's the first point. Second point, lots of people in Italy don't know, and I have to confess I didn't know before working on this, that some 25 to 28% of our foreign trade, of Italian foreign trade, passes through Switzerland on its way to or from the rest of Europe. So in a sense, Switzerland is one of the main gateways of Italy for its trade with Europe, which in turn is our main partner, because the European Union, taken as a whole, is the main Italian trade partner. So if tomorrow Switzerland decided to shut its the Gotthard tunnel or other ways, I mean, we would be in serious trouble. We couldn't export anymore and import a lot of stuff that we import. And that was the second one. Third, you may know that Italy is a very strong energy importer. Part of the reason is that we are poor of natural resources. We are our economy we transport things. We don't have a lot of natural resources, and also we opted out from the nuclear power after Chernobyl. So actually, we don't have in our energy mix. Nuclear power is absent. So we import some 85% of the energy we consume, which is a lot. And in this frame, Switzerland is by far the first source of our energy, both generated in Switzerland or conveyed to our national grid via Switzerland, let's say. And that's a very strong strategic relation. It's not just culture. Here is I would say national strategic interests. And the third point, which is shown here, this is the fluxes, the flows, of the trade and investments between Switzerland and the rest of Europe and also the world. You see the United States, China, and Japan. Italy and Switzerland share a lot of trade. I mean, Switzerland is not a country. It's not just a passing by country for our goods. It's also the trade between the countries is also very, very strong. We ranked, I had to write it down because otherwise I would never remember this. Italy is Switzerland's second trade partner, and Switzerland is Italy's sixth trade partner, which is a lot. I mean, you managed to sell us espresso, which is remarkable in a country like Italy that doesn't have Starbucks, because our coffee market is very, very hard to penetrate. Nestlé came out with the Nespresso machines, and those coffee making machines are today the best-selling coffee machines in Italy. A lot of people stopped making coffee with the mocha, and instead they're using the Nespresso machines. And I'm a testimonial on them, and the coffee is good. I have to say, it's not like espresso in the bar, but it resembles. I mean, it's a very good compromise.
Or of Italian brands.
Or of Italian brands, but actually, the coffee. I mean, the coffee that they use is the same that is used by Italian brands. So, as a matter of fact, they're very smart at that. So, I mean, their relation overall, globally considered from a cultural and linguistic, but also from an economic and a strategic point of view, is very strong. So the question is, why is there such a misperception of Switzerland and Italy, of a country that shares with us so much? And I think the answering these questions brings us to, let's say, two levels of analysis, if you want. The more superficial level, the easier answer, is that probably, and this is true for Italy and Switzerland, but probably for most neighboring countries, a real mutual understanding and a real mutual knowledge can develop in countries that anyway are varied. They have differences inside them. Can develop really only between neighboring territories. For example, talking about Italy and Switzerland, you see that actually Switzerland borders 4 Italian regions, which is Valle d'Aosta, Piedmont, Lombardy, and Alto Adige, which is the minority German-speaking part of Italy. But as a matter of fact, and maybe you know much better than me, most similarities are between Lombardy and the Italian and speaking part of Switzerland, because those two parts of Italy and Switzerland, respectively, share not just a border, they share, for example, they share an accent. The Italian, which is spoken in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, thanks. It's very similar in accent to the Italian which is spoken in Lombardy. They share, for example, local cuisine. The cuisine of the Italian speaking part of Switzerland is quite similar in many dishes, many aspects, to the cuisine of Lombardy. Of course, the landscape, especially in the bordering part, is quite similar. So, in short, that Italian region and the Ticino, especially in Switzerland, they share a lot of cultural and material features. They make them much more similar to each other than, for example, Lombardy is to many other Italian regions. Lombardy is much more similar to Ticino than it is to Lazio, which is Rome, where I live. So much more, not to talk about Sicily, not to talk about Tuscany and so on. So this is the first point. I mean, probably it's impossible that two countries, that a border and a language is enough for two countries to really understand and share a mutual understanding. Probably. Maybe I'm wrong about this. But anyway, this is the case of Italy and Switzerland, of course. Sorry. But then there is the second level of analysis, which is, or aims to be, a little bit deeper and broader at the same time, and has to do with the direction that Europe is taking, I was mentioning. As you know, Switzerland is not part of the Eurozone, is not even part of the EU. So it's not an institutional argument that I'm making here. It's more of a, let's say, historical and political argument that I'm making. And by the way, as a prominent Swiss official was commenting to me a few days ago in Rome in a meeting we had, he said that Switzerland is in many aspects becoming a de facto member of the European Union, because, which was a bold statement from a Swiss person, because he meant to say that Switzerland had to harmonize its legislation in many key aspects, such as trade or food production, or even more and more banking secrecy and so on, which is something which is going on anyway. And that's because the European Union it's a sort of inescapable geographical and also economic environment for Switzerland. I mean, the European Union as a whole is by far the first trade partner of Switzerland. I see the data here. 70% of the Swiss exports go to the European Union. So, I mean, it couldn't be otherwise. And you see here, I mean, these are the Swiss exports, and you see that most of them go to especially 3 countries in Europe, which is Germany, France, and Italy in order. So, in a way, Switzerland, like it or not, is very much involved in Europe, and in the direction, in dynamics, economic and political, that shape the European Union. So, what's happening in Europe right now? It is happening that the economic crisis has, if you want, unveiled some pre-existing problems, which now are exploding. Probably the biggest of them, and that I briefly would like to comment here, is the famous democratic deficit, which is something that, at least in Europe, we hear all the time. What is that? It is basically the fact that we have national leaders in each of our countries, which are elected by their constituencies, by the national taxpayers. But that, especially in these moments where the debt crisis of the several European countries, Italy among them, is at its peak, those democratically elected leaders actually have to follow fiscal policies and fiscal patterns, which are decided by non-elected guys who sit usually in the main European institutions, especially the Commission and the Central Bank at the very moment. This is creating, I put it a little bit dramatically, but as a matter of fact, I think that's what it is. It's creating a sort of a short circuit, sort of an unbearable contradiction between power and responsibility, or between taxation and representation. As a matter of fact, in Europe at the very moment, the famous principle that you're much more familiar with than I am, no taxation without representation, is not really applied. Because if you take countries like Greece or Italy, in Italy now at the very moment we have a so-called technical government, which is anyway an oxymoron because no government, I think, can be fully technical. I mean, every government makes political choices anyway. But apart from that, we have this government which is supported by a parliamentary majority, because we are a parliamentary republic. But as a matter of fact, that government is not coming from an election. It's coming of a reshuffling, which was deemed necessary in order to bring back the country on a sustainable fiscal path. This government, which is anyway very much appreciated by a big slice of the electorate, but anyway is applying recipes that has never been submitted to the voters. They have never been tested in the national elections, and those recipes are basically devised in the European Central Bank, in the European Commission, and I have to say in some other European capitals, Berlin, most of all. Are the result of a demand of fiscal sustainability, which doesn't stem from the demands of the national electorate, but from a situation which threatens to have Italy going bankrupt, to put it bluntly, and in doing so to unravel, to break up the euro, because we are such a big economy within the eurozone, and we have such a big national debt that if we are not able to finance ourselves in the markets, the European institutions and all the eurozone countries combined together wouldn't have enough resources in order to bail us out. I'm making it very short, but this is actually the core of the problem we have today. How we came to this is a good matter of reflection, I think, for all of us. Because what is very interesting, I think, about the euro currency, about the European unifying process in general, is that Europe, as we know it today, the European Union, was never really conceived, was never really about democracy. It may seem, strange, and maybe it's questionable, and I hope you challenge this. But European unification was never really about, or mainly about, democracy. It was most of all about security. Michel Barnier, which is a long-time European bureaucrat commissioner, he says that Europe, and I quote, it's made without the people. It's made for the people, but not by the people. And it's the child, one of European, and also I have to say after the Second World War, North American, American leaderships, which have an ingrained tendencies of which basically distrust the ability of their own people, electorates, to conceive a unified Europe. European leaders are usually very skeptical about the ability of their own electorate to stand together as one in Europe. They are very skeptical of their ability to overcome stereotypes and national differences. And so there is a famous saying, well, not very famous, but I think it's very revealing. Jacques Delors, who has been a very very famous head of the European Commission. He once said that l'Europe avance masquée. Europe is a sort of a stealth operation which is carried on despite of what people what the electorate think. Probably couldn't be otherwise, given that we fought each other for centuries, and then we tried to commit suicide twice in 30 years with 2 world wars that nearly erased our civilization. But as a matter of fact, this is the context in which, the mental and political context in which Europe was born. And I think that it's important not to forget also the historical context that saw Europe birth. And that context was a totally different world from what we have today. It was the Cold War, the Rome's treaties that forged the first European communities that eventually would evolve into the European Union, were signed in 1957. And at that time, Europe was very much conceived not only by European leaders but also by the Truman administration as a sort of European pillar of NATO. Lord Ismay's, the first Secretary General of NATO, famous formula that NATO was conceived to keep the Germans, the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. Well, the European Union was not very different. It was conceived as a sort of tool to bring back Europe standing on its feet, and to contrast the feared advance of communism, and most of all, not to allow Germany to be a threat anymore for Europe. I don't know if you ever heard, for those of you who are not very familiar with Italy, if you've ever heard of Giulio Andreotti, who has been a long-time Italian politician, a protagonist of the Italian Republican season from 1945 to a few years ago now. He's very old, he's retired.
Still a senator.
Sorry?
Still a senator.
Still a senator, but it doesn't go very often. It's like Churchill in his very late years. He's not heard anymore. But he was famous for his aphorisms, and he once said that he liked Germany so much that he was very glad there were 2 of them, East and West. Well, that was the mental attitude towards Germany. And this kind of Europe worked wonderfully from 1957 to 1989. But then the Berlin Wall fell down. Then the Cold War was over. And at that very point, this Europe in denial, if you want, this Europe that was considered as a security tool more than a European democratic effort, revealed its, I wouldn't say weakness, maybe weakness, but it became outdated in 1 or 2 years. But, and this is the problem, it still managed to a large extent as the Cold War never ended. So nowadays you have, think of the euro. The euro currency, if you think of the euro currency, you don't really find a single strong binding economic reason for its existence. Because it is a currency that binds together economies which are totally different. Think of Germany and Italy. It was used before the euro to devalue every time there were economic difficulties. The price we paid was inflation. It was fine. Germany, because of the Weimar Republic and so on, is scared to death by inflation. So instead of devaluing to become competitive, they make reforms, which is a much cleverer way anyway to be economically competitive. So nowadays you find these 2 countries which are tied together by a currency, which is a sort of a prison cell, if you want, for both of them, because we cannot devalue our way out of the recession, but Germany doesn't really trust a country that has such a conception of its own currency. They don't really trust countries which are not economically trustable, economically sound, which is the way Italy is seen, is the way Greece is seen, is the way Spain is seen, and so on. And by the way, and this is very interesting, I'm going to finish last 5 minutes. It is very interesting that the euro currency, if you think, is the only case in the world of a currency that lacks a sovereign, a government. The euro doesn't have a government, it has 17 of them, each one which with its own agenda. So this explains a lot of the troubles we're in now. So the question is, why the euro? Well, and here we go back to the previous point. The euro was not much about economy. It was most of all a way to ease German, British, and Italians mainly fears about German reunification. I mean, in order to reunify, Germany was convinced that it was very nice if they gave up the main tools of their resurrection after the Second World War. That was the currency, the Deutsche Mark, and the central bank, the Bundesbank. That became the euro and the European Central Bank, at least in the intentions of those who devised the euro. But as a matter of fact, it's not like that, because if you look at the polls that were made in the right after the German unification, most of the Germans were actually against the euro. So this is, I think, a typical example of Europe Europe as a stealth operation. I mean, Europe, which is carried out as a sort of elite concept, which has to pass over the head of people, because people otherwise, voters, wouldn't be able to understand it, and so wouldn't be able to do what's good and right for themselves. It's a very elitarian conception, if you want, but it's the way euro has been managed so far. So what does all this have to do with Italy and Switzerland? Well, I think that, and this is the last point I would like to make, one of probably the worst legacies of this season of economic and political problems that Europe is going through right now is that we are witnessing maybe it's too pessimistic, but I think to a certain extent it's true. We're witnessing in Europe a sort of new divide. The historical divide was East-West, the Iron Curtain. The new divide, political divide, which is emerging, is between the North and the South, the creditors and the debtors. Economies like the ones you see in yellow, which are basically sound, which are performing well, and which are asked to bear most of the weight of the bailouts of the southern countries, the ones you see in yellow, which have economic problems, and which, if they have to be bailed out, they have to be bailed out with someone else's money, because they don't have enough money to do it. And so far has been the case of Greece and of Ireland, by the way. And so this is mainly an economic and financial divide, okay? But the point is that this divide is reinforcing ancient stereotypes, those very stereotypes that the European unification was meant to, if not to erase, at least to lower a little bit. Maybe it was not a great, it didn't hit the news here in America, but when Angela Merkel, the German head of government, went to Athens in Greece, it was maybe 3 weeks ago, she was welcomed by Nazi flags by protesters in the street. I mean, that's a powerful example of how old stereotypes really never died in Europe. They subsided until some reasons, in this case the economic crisis, which is really taking a heavy toll on some European countries more than others, and Greece is one of them, made them re-emerge. Now, in this frame, Switzerland is, if you want, a key country. It is not part of the European Union, okay, but it sits on this new North-South divide. Switzerland is a very diverse country, not only in terms of languages, also in terms of religions, in terms of cultures, German, French, Italian. So as Trieste used to stand on the Arab curtain, to a certain extent Switzerland now sits on this new frontier, if you want, on this new border, which is not a political one, but it's a cultural and economic one, which is emerging. And that to me is quite worrying. So, to wrap up, I started saying that the way Italians see Switzerland is a very stereotype way. Mainly positive stereotypes, that's right, stereotypes. Things that are partly rooted in the reality of the country, but partly have nothing to do with it. The country of banks, the country of chocolate. Most of people in Italy have no idea of the industrial power that Switzerland can actually express. There are a lot of transnational corporations that are based in Switzerland, that are made in Switzerland. Now, this stereotype relation, it's something that is replicated on a European scale, and which is growing stronger, if you want, because of these economic divides, which are exasperated by the economic crisis. And so, to a certain extent, this bilateral relation is actually a metaphor of a trend which is emerging in Europe, and that sees countries looking at each other with suspicious attitudes. This is a shame. As a matter of fact, a tool which was meant to unify Europe, which is the euro, is actually dividing Europe more than it is unifying it, at least so far. But I think it's the reality of facts, and we have to look at reality, at the world as it is, and not as we would like it to be. It could be that what I have said so far, it doesn't make sense at all, and in this case, please, I really would like you to raise your hands and in a town hall spirit.
But stay seated where you are.
Also because I'm not even comparable to the candidates. But by the way, this is more or less the way I see the Italian-Swiss relationship. It's the way it can be framed in a more broad European perspective. Thank you very much for your patience and for trying to make an effort to. I mean, probably I'm not the worst English speaker that exists in Italy, but I'm fully aware that my English is not probably the best you can find in an English-speaking country like this is. So thank you also for your understanding. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maronta. And as our speaker said, the floor is open, and I would like to point out that we have the honor of having Professor Hermann Aller, who happens to be of the German-speaking part of Switzerland, but who is the leading expert in the United States for all that refers to the history of Italian language and Italian dialects. So that's another further proof of, a living further proof of these melting of different languages and cultures that are in Switzerland. Thank you very much for being here, Hermann. And we are also very interested in your approach, having these peculiar features of being a German-Swiss person who is the leading expert in Italian language here in the States.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also would like to thank you for your talk, which I enjoyed very much. It was very fascinating. Perhaps we could also add that some of the stereotypes you mentioned by Italians towards Switzerland exist also the other way around. But I believe that Switzerland has always had a great admiration for Italian culture and the language and civilization. So very positive attitudes towards Italy. In part also because of the great tradition of labor presence, of course, since the 70s, the Great Immigration and so forth. So in addition to the Italian Antiticino, Antegrigioni, Italiano and so on, there has also been always a very strong presence of Italians from all regions, mostly in the south, of course. This has helped a great deal to foster Italian culture in Switzerland. But recently, one sees that there has been also a certain loss. Italian seems to be losing a little bit their, for example, in the schools in Switzerland. Spanish seems to be on the increase. Of course, English is now Anglo-American English is of course the language which everybody has to study, and I think this may also be a little bit of a threat towards to Italian. So it's a very complex situation, I think, but it's interesting to compare the two directions. So I wonder what could be done. I mean, this is the Settimana della Lingua Italiana. I wonder what could be done actually to make sure that Italian is going to be preserved very strongly in the multilingual country. Of course, it's all territorial, but actually a lot of Swiss speak Italian. I think especially the Swiss Germans have always had a great admiration for the Romance nations, Romance cultures. I mean, you haven't mentioned tourism in both directions,
I haven't, yes,
which
that's
is
right.
certainly a very important part.
Yes.
I mean, so.
I don't know if I have to can reply directly or maybe.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Tunnel.
I think that the fact that the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland is quite a small part. I mean, the Italian speakers are a minority compared to the German and the French. Doesn't help very much. But probably your point about Italian losing ground to Spanish in this case in Switzerland. It's something that is not just taking place in Switzerland, it has been taking place in other countries as well.
Not in the US.
Not in the
Yeah,
US,
Italian
that's right,
seems to be
that's
on
right.
the-
Which is remarkable anyway, yes. I think that you can see it from two perspectives. The first one is that many people who have to make an effort to study another language nowadays, especially in a very competitive, difficult job market. I mean, in the West we're experiencing a recession, but after all, they tend to focus on languages that they think are useful. So they don't probably they would be willing to learn Italian or Greek because they like the culture and so on. But then they think I mean, at least that many students I've been teaching at the university, as you mentioned, and I still teach, although not on a regular basis. And many students, Erasmus students that are in Italy with an exchange program, which is a European program. They tell me that yes, they came to Italy in spite of the fact that actually probably Italian would not be very useful to them in their career. So the point is that the situation, the economic situation, is quite grim. So probably people tend to direct their effort towards languages that they think can be more useful in the working environment. And that one point. The second point, which is related to the first one, is that Italian is studied basically because of the cultural fascination that the country exerts on those who learn it, which is great. I mean, soft power, as a matter of fact, which is a very American concept, it's about bringing people on your side without imposing them anything. I mean, being attractive to others. So this is cultural fascination is a very strong soft power tool. The point is that I wonder, and this is not a rhetorical question, it's a real question that I address to you as well. I would like to hear what you're saying about it. I wonder how much Italy is still producing soft power nowadays. Because if you think of the areas in which the Italian language is lingua franca, as English is today for everything. It's art, it's music, classical music, food. But those are aspects which are in great part a legacy of our past. It's not something which is being shaped right now. It's something that we inherited. So what I often wonder is how much nowadays Italy is being able to project itself abroad with the same cultural attractiveness that exerts its historical past. You come to Rome not because its suburbs are very nice, but because you have the Colosseum, which is something that dates back to 2,000 years ago. And of course you come also because the people are nice, or nicer maybe than other places, because they're friendly and so on. You go to Venice because it's a jewel, but Venice was not built yesterday, it was built the day before yesterday, or even before. So probably one of the reasons why Italian is losing ground in several countries, of course there is another point, which is the Italian institutes abroad, Dante, that are the institutes that are meant to be the reference point for teaching Italian are very much underfunded. That's another story. But probably the reason is that there is a very big gap between what Italy is able to project today in terms of soft power, let's call it this, and what its past exerts in terms of fascination of people. I think this is a very important point because it calls into questions our not only how dynamic we are in terms of economic performance, but also in terms of ideas and ideals that we are able to produce and to project as attractive things that attract people to Italy. Probably that there's a very big gap between what Italy is nowadays and what it has been able to produce in its more or less recent historical past. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the points that could be taken into consideration. Sure.
It wasn't until about 15 years ago or so that
Yes.
a university was created in the Italian part of Switzerland.
Yes.
And before that, the Ticinesi who wanted to pursue higher education had to go to another part of Switzerland or to Italy
Yes.
if they wanted to pursue studies in the same language. So what impact has had a Ticinese university on the preservation of Italian, etc., and also keeping the people in the Ticino, because it had been losing population.
Yes.
And also the
as a
fortune that
percentage.
Consul is from Ticino and Valentina Rebush is also from Ticino. So I
I'm
think
one of the
you.
first graduate of that university.
Okay.
So feel free to
Were
jump
you-
into the conversation.
Were you happy
Valentina.
with the experience?
I was. I had like a pro and a con, meaning that the very first, years were also like, we were very privileged because we had a very personal approach to professors and classes in general, but we were all also very underdeveloped at that point. I think most students then were from Ticino and from Italy, because being that the university didn't have that much resources at the time, we borrowed a lot from Milano, so a lot from the various universities there. And some French-speaking, students from the French part of Switzerland, some Germans, but not that many. And I think nowadays, because the campus really expanded, there's much more of that happening, but also a lot reflecting a little bit what you were describing. So like the multilingual aspect of it, a lot of borrowed professors from all over. So, English. I was recently reading that they're expanding like an MBA program where the language, official language is going to be English, you know, German. So still, I would say very multilingual.
If I can add something to that, Milan has very good universities. Bocconi, Politecnico, so there are many, several at least. And I think they're still magnets for Italian-speaking person from other parts of Italy, and in this case from Switzerland, if they want to study specific subjects. But I think that it's very important. I mean, universities in general are very important tools of cultural promotion in general. What I wonder is if the impact of such a university is more to be seen in the preservation, let's say, of the Italian spoken in Switzerland, or is more as a sort of rebalancing element in the frame of the domestic Swiss balances. I mean, the fact that the Italian-speaking minority is a minority. I would say that having a university is more of a rebalancing, of a tool to rebalance the, I would say, political also, shares, balances between within the country. Then you're saying yes because you agree. Unfortunately,
perhaps,
all right.
Perhaps also has to be mentioned that it's a university that has received some of the highest ratings.
Absolutely, it's a very good one.
All among the Swiss universities.
I met students from that university, and they're all very brilliant.
Excellent,
it's an excellent university.
But perhaps also they kept in mind that it doesn't have all schools like some of the other universities, like Zurich and so on. I think it's architettura, and scienze della comunicazione, and maybe 2-3 more, but really not all the facoltà which you would have. So the Ticinesi still have to go to
depending on the specialty.
What I'm mentioning about Milan's university. I mean, for faculties, yes, you have to go.
Become the Università Ticinese.
Yes.
I mean, in the past. Perhaps not today.
I think to a certain extent it's still nowadays. I have a friend who works there as a researcher, and among his pupils he has...
For humanity, it's been very important.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but for this reason, I think that because of the strength of other schools like neighboring, so whether it's Italy or like Zurich or like this, they try to specialize in some other fields, as you're saying, because when I was actually living in Milan, the Scienze delle Comunicazioni was not existing at that point there. It was just a specializzazione of like either literature or something like that. So at that point, Ticino had a little bit of an advantage of like, pulling people out of Italy over there because you couldn't have like a proper faculty in Italy of that.
Can I just say, I would like to mention Alberto is also from Ticino, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we are from the generation, there were no university in Ticino at that time.
So where did you study?
Well, a little bit everywhere, but not, it was not possible at that time, and that's one of the reasons why in my generation a lot of people from my region did not go to the university, because it was a matter of financial, go to Zurich to live or Geneva.
Yes,
or
it's expensive.
It was very expensive. You had to rent an apartment and everything, and that's why most of the people started an
Apprenticeship?
Apprenticeship.
I don't know, what was your experience?
I was educated in Ticino, so I didn't go to any university in the northern part of Switzerland. I attended other schools in Ticino, but professionally speaking, in order to kind of develop a career, I had to kind of at one point move to Zurich and have an experience in the German part, because that's where the German and the French part, where most of the big corporations are located. So if you just stay in Ticino, it's hard to have kind of interesting kind of professional career.
That's right.
Yeah, but also interesting enough, I mean, even though the German-speaking part is the biggest one in Switzerland, it's also not a language that is spoken so widely in the world. So a lot of the language is English as well, and a lot of people from the German-speaking part, they even move to Geneva to have to go to HEI or something where they combine French with English, and always looking forward to basically
yeah, but that is very right. But in this very moment, German has a very heavy political weight as a language because it's the language of Germany. There is the Goethe Institute in Rome, and also other Goethe Institutes in other parts of Italy. Which the Goethe Institute is the German Institute for the teaching of German language abroad. They can't keep up with the request of German courses that people want to get to Germany to work. They don't keep pace. They have been hiring new. I know a person who works there. So, and you can imagine for an Italian speaker, I mean, Germany is hell. No, sorry, the German language is hell.
We'll delete this from the recording.
Germany, no, because I meant to. I had in mind two opposite concepts. I mean, Germany is heaven for working, but German language is hell for learning. But in spite of that, you have special requests because people don't want to learn just German; they want to learn financial German or technical German in this very moment, these contingencies, because Germany is doing so well and so strong from an economic point of view. I mean, German is gaining. Of course, it's still a narrow language from a geographical point of view, but within at least the European Union, it's been gaining momentum because of it's the language that you have to speak. I mean, you know better than me. You don't. You speak. You know, you're a German. Swiss German. You know very. Probably you know Germany. I mean, you've been there. Yeah. And you know better than me that Germany is not that kind of country like the Netherlands, where you can go and work without learning Germany at some point. German. I mean, I spent 1.5 years more or less in the Netherlands, and I never learned the Dutch. It's way beyond my possibilities. Actually, I mean, I should have stopped working and learned that language, but Germany is not like that. So I worked in English, but Germany is not like that. You have to learn German. So in this moment, Germany is its strength, its economic strength is reflected in the way their language is performing on the language market, if you want, at least in Europe, and especially in those European countries that are feeling more the hardships of the economic crisis. So because the same pattern of immigration flows towards Germany, you have them also in Greece and in Spain, especially in Spain. There are a lot of people, and for Spanish people, learning German is the same as Italian. It's very difficult. It's a totally different language. But still, people are applying for German courses. They're paying a lot of money, and they're trying to do their best to learn the language in order to go there. And because of the European citizenship, you're not. You don't have all those restrictions that, for example, you have from Europe coming to the United States. I mean, you can't stay in another European country without and look for a job without working from the day one. So you have the chance to go there and stay a while even without working and look for a job. It's a privilege that you don't have in other countries. So you can come to the States and overstay your touristic visa, and because you could run into troubles. So that's a sort of I would say economic and political weight that German language has in this very moment, which was not like that until a few years ago. So that's the point. Any other? Is that something of what I said which has not convinced you at all? I mean, something that you think is very inaccurate or that doesn't sound to you about the bilateral relations, or maybe about what the direction Europe is taking. What the what the vision you get of our European problems from here. I know that Mr. Obama is very worried because if we slip into a recession once again, I mean, that would jeopardize also the American economy. So his re-election would go, but election day is very close to. So
I have a question about what you said about that Swiss politician who said that somehow.
yes, Switzerland is integrating into.
And it is true. I mean, no matter what might be on paper, but for example, Switzerland is already part of the Schengen countries,
It
right?
is.
So Schengen, for those of you who are not familiar, is a treaty that is not necessarily subscribed by members of the European Union.
For example, not by the UK.
But that allows you, once you enter one of these countries, to move freely as a tourist or a visitor to all the other countries without having a passport or a visa. So Switzerland is not part of the EU, but is already part of these group of Schengen countries. So if you land in Milan or Rome and you want to go to Switzerland, it's much easier. It's not like going to a different continent or country. It feels part of the same union. In practice, which, I'm not asking you to prophesize, but which are the fields that you think will be next in these further integration of Switzerland into the European milieu?
Yeah.
Let's not use any other form.
I wouldn't bet on that, but I think that banking secrecy is really on the table. But nowadays, for example, at this very moment, Italy and Switzerland are negotiating a bank deal in order to. Okay, let's put it very, frankly. You know that Italy has a very high rate of tax evasion, very, very high. 1/3 of the economy is estimated to escape taxes, which is a lot, and especially in moments like this where you have very high debt. So you cannot use the Keynesian tricks to stimulate the economy because actually there are no public money for that. The government is raising taxes both centrally and locally. So you have a lot of people who are, very much complaining about, and we have a very high tax rate because we have a very inefficient public expenditure. And I mean, in this frame, tax evasion is becoming really. I would love to say culturally. Yes, culturally condemned, but it's still not like that, and I think it would take some time. But of course, it's becoming economically unbearable. Now, our tax evasion has made the fortune of lots of banks around the world, and not just the Swiss one, because there are a lot of countries that have benefited from people taking their money abroad. But it wouldn't be hypocritical to say that Swiss banks have not benefited from that. And now, I think that the banking secrecy that in Switzerland it's usually referred to as banking privacy, it's becoming really an issue, a very strong issue. And it's not just Italy and Switzerland, it's also Switzerland and Germany, for example. They have the same deals in place. So I think that this is going to be next. But this is really a sensitive and tough issue because for two reasons. Not only on the Swiss side, but also on the Italian one. Because if you make such a deal, tax evasion has been always, I wouldn't say promoted, but excused by Italian politicians as a sort of escape that was allowed to Italian, especially entrepreneurs, from a very inefficient state. So if you start to fight tax evasion for real, then as a government, as a state, you also have the burden to start fixing things that are wrong in the way public money is managed. So it is a double-edged sword. Usually when you talk about the subjects, and this is one of the stereotypes I was talking about, it's real about time. People will tell you people pay taxes in Italy. they would tell you it's really about time, for the Swiss to have a legislation on banking secrecy, which is more, more transparency and so on. But the point is that so far there has been no political will at all in Italy to have this kind of deals in place, because it will force governments to make tax evasion unjustifiable. And to make tax evasion unjustifiable means to start to manage the public money and general institutions better than they have been so far. So it's an issue that involves really Switzerland, but also very much Italy. And it is a cultural change which is required on both sides. On the Swiss side, because banking secrecy is not just about stealing other people's money, money from other countries where people don't pay taxes. No, it's not that. It's a really I think we have an article on that subject. It's really something which is very much part of the Swiss financial culture. But on the other side, it also requires a mental and political shift in Italy as well, because if you really want people to pay taxes, you have to be accountable for how those money is spent. And so far it has been the case, but not always, to put it mildly. So I think that is going to be next.
Yeah. We used to have a comment on Wall Street that there would be no tax havens if it weren't for the fact that there were many tax hells.
Tax what?
And hell.
Hells, yes.
Tax haven, tax hell. In the case of Italy, a few months ago I looked at the statistics that the OECD puts out every year. Tax revenues in OECD countries, you're probably familiar with that.
Painful statistics, I know.
Italy was the third highest OECD country in terms of government revenues as a percentage of GDP. It was something like 42, 43.
Yes.
And the United States is
Officially.
like 25, 26%
Officially
of
42,
GDP.
43. Officially. Because that rate doesn't count. It doesn't reflect the real burden, because there are so many people who don't pay taxes. The burden on those
So this
who pay.
is what actually is being paid, and it is that high. It's based on actual
Yes.
tax revenues.
The point is that yes, but the point is that I think that in Europe and probably in the world, the highest tax rate is Scandinavian countries.
And Italy is right up there.
But have you ever been to Sweden and to Italy and gotten a train or used the subway? I mean, the point is that you don't get the services you pay for. So this is a huge blow to our, well, first of all, to justice, but also to the competitiveness of the country, because we are not an attractive country to invest in, not only because our bureaucracy can be hell, but also because very often you don't get the right infrastructure and so on. And probably the biggest failure of the Italian state, talking about modern Italian state, so from 1861 to nowadays, has been that this huge tax revenue, this huge money, wealth drain, hasn't been really enough or properly used to solve probably the biggest problem of the country, which is the North-South Divide. I don't know those of you who've traveled extensively or not to Italy, but if you go, it sounds even banal to say because it's something that which is repeated very often, but if you go to the north and you go to the south, if you go to the very north and you go to the very south, believe me, there's no racism in this statement, because my mother, half of my family is from the south of Italy, so I mean I'm at home when I'm in Basilicata, which is the region my mother is from. As a matter of fact, you are in two different countries as far as especially infrastructure is concerned. If we have a high-speed rail network, which really revolutionized the way you travel from Naples to Milan, because now you go from Rome to Milan in less than 3 hours by train. We're talking about more than 1,000 kilometers, so it's very good. But if you go farther south than Naples, you don't have high speed anymore. I mean, half of the country is just cut off.
You don't
Now-
have what? Oh, high speed.
High-speed trains, bullet trains, yes. So I mean, that's the point, and you could apply this to highways. There was a New York Times article not a few days ago about the infamous or famous, depending on how you say it, autostrada highway that goes from that goes right from it borders the Tyrrhenian and goes to Calabria. That highway that was built in record speed in the 60s is now taking at the pace it needs renewal because it's very old, and at the current pace it will take like 70 or 80 years to renew. Yeah, because it's so slow. And anyway, its costs are doubling. They are escalating because a lot of subcontractors, they're linked to local mafias. So I mean, they take bribes and so on. I mean, so it's the costs are escalating. So in a nutshell, I mean, we have a very, very high. And so, by the way, yes, 42% is the rate which is paid by the country in general. But for example, my mother, she's a therapist. She's a freelance? No, it doesn't apply to a therapist. It's freelance, so is not employed by anyone. She works on her own, and she's one of self-employed. Thank you very much. I'm from a journalistic environment, so everyone is freelance. It's not really like that. She's self-employed. Well, the rate she pays, and it's like 51%. So it's not evenly distributed. 42 is the average, which is high enough, by the way. So we have this dire situation, and the current government is trying to fix things. But of course, we are in an emergency mode. We had to prove to the markets that we are able to fix our economy. And what do you do if you're in a rush? You raise taxes, which is what is happening right now. The tax rate has increased very much.
What about tax amnesty? Every once in a while, there's I think
The
every
last
government
one.
has tried that.
Yeah, the last one was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, something like that.
Something,
Yeah. Oh,
they've raised a lot of money. When
you know
they
what?
Do that.
Not really that much. Much less than they expected, because a lot of people didn't even adhere to the amnesty because they were sure that anyway that they wouldn't be caught. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's terrible. I think that amnesties have become less and less economically rewarding with the passing of the years. It's a tool which is not working anymore as it used to be. So. But anyway, tax amnesties and illegal immigration amnesties are something that every now and then return. But yes, as a matter of fact, I think that the tax issue is something that which is going to be solved. I mean, we pay too high. Too much taxes. This is just killing the economy, actually. But this is the big debate you have in Europe nowadays. The debate about austerity measures, with the I banalize a little bit, but I mean with northern countries, especially Germany, which are advocating for austerity measures that are in a way based on raising taxes in order to fix the public accounts, and the anti-austerity advocates that say that these kind of measures actually are killing the economy, because if you raise taxes, people consume less, and so you enter a sort of vicious circle. It is not something that concerns Italy. I mean, not only. I mean, you have the very same debate about Spain, about Greece, which is experiencing a terrible situation. About Portugal, you have the same debate in Ireland as well. This is a political issue, an issue of debate in Europe, I would say, in Brussels, where the European institutions have their quarters. Not only in Italy, so it's an issue both on a national and on a European scale at the very moment.
If there are no other questions, we would like to thank again Dr. Maronta for
Thank
being
you
here
very
with
much.
us and sharing this conversation on Switzerland. I think we all learned quite a bit about the
Who
relationship
knows?
between these two neighboring and friend countries. And as a last remark, after what we heard again about the Italian tax situation and so on, we really don't wonder about how, for the Italians, the Swiss live in heaven. They somehow did, compared to the situation that many Italians perceive is their own. And I would like to thank again our friends from the Swiss and the Italian Consulate for being here with us, and also for putting this together. And thank you also to the other friends from the Italian Consulate.
Thanks to you.
Michael, and thank you. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you here very soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much.